Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us tonight for a presentation on being a good water steward by David Jackson at Snohomish Conservation District. My name is Allison Renard. I am the Community Engagement Manager at Whidbey Island Conservation District, and we're really excited to be partnering with Snohomish Conservation District to serve Whidbey, Camino, and Snohomish County residents. Just to give you all a little bit of a background on what our conservation districts do. We partner with our local landowners to improve habitat, soil health, productivity, resiliency, and water quality through stewardship practices. And conservation districts, a little history for you, were really formed dating back to the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl. Through the New Deal, the federal government created the Natural Resource Conservation Service, which is a USDA program really oriented towards, preventing the next Dust Bowl from happening, and created the Farm Bill, which is legislation that's renewed every 4 years. And they knew that the federal government wasn't the best suited to really serve local residents and farmers. And so they created conservation districts as really the local resource hub for folks. So we help both with technical assistance and connecting folks to financial assistance, which is often USDA or state funds to help them implement these conservation practices. And we just wanted to remind you all, please stay muted during the presentation, but definitely invite you to use the chat throughout for any technical assistance questions or any questions. We'll take some breaks throughout the presentation to answer questions. We'll also have a Q&A where you all can unmute and ask any questions at the end, but feel free to just drop them in the chat if anything comes up, so you don't forget them, and we'll do our best to answer as we go along. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and turn things over to David.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. I am going to get myself set up here. All right. All right. Thanks again for joining us tonight. We already thanked the Department of Ecology. Have we already thanked the department? Okay. I wanted to make sure that I didn't miss that because it's very important. We want to say thanks to the Department of Ecology. They are the folks who actually funded this grant and fund a lot of our work. Their goal in this case is water quality and fish habitat. We're going to talk a little bit about how rain management, which you would think of as really clean water, leads to water pollution and issues with our fish habitat. Right? Okay, so as I was saying, we're going to talk about water quality, and we are going to talk about how rain, which you would think of as extremely clean water, does contribute to a number of issues, including pollution and degradation of our waterways. There's sort of two general models for what happens when rainwater hits the ground. Shouldn't come to anybody's surprise, or it shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone that water falls from the sky. That is rain. We collectively call any kind of precipitation stormwater. So that is hail, sleet, snow, rain. Doesn't matter if it's a light drizzle, if it's condensation from clouds, or if it is very intense downpour. If it strikes a natural system, there is very little runoff. Runoff is what happens when water moves sideways as opposed to either being taken up by plants or going into the soil. The majority of water goes into the soil in a natural system. A small amount goes over the ground, usually where it eventually sort of runs out of speed and then is absorbed by plants. A large amount goes up through evapotranspiration. Evapotranspiration is a very fancy word to say it is taken up by plants or it is released into the air. If you have any questions on terminology, I will try to explain them as I go, but if anything is unclear, please do go ahead and ask. I'm happy to clarify any of these terms.
David,
Yes.
before you continue, if you could speak just a little bit louder, it's
Okay.
better than when we tested, but it's still a little quiet.
Okay, I will do my best. And if my neighbors complain, everyone on this call has to be my ally. In a city model, online is really challenging for me because I can never tell if my jokes land. And that is really the biggest challenge I think we can all agree of the last few years. So in an urban model that does not have as much plants and does not have as much access to the soil, the majority of water runs off, meaning it hits an impervious surface and then it runs off into a system. Now, like all water, it eventually enters a waterway. It either, it collects in a spot and then evaporates, or it enters a waterway. Our storm systems are very good at moving water from one area to another area, specifically into waterways. That is how we deal with most of our rain. We pump it back into a stream somewhere. The problem with that is that as water strikes impervious surfaces, it gathers pollutants. Now, I dropped another word you may not know there, impervious. You probably do know the word impervious, but when I say impervious surface, I mean roofs, driveways, sidewalks, roads, parking lots, anything that does not allow water to move through it. All of these also carry certain pollutants. These can be, feces from dogs and pigeons. This can be, oil or tire rubber from your car. It could be a sidewalk chalk. It can be any number of things. But as the water moves across the surface, it picks those elements up and then it deposits them in local water bodies. So to go in a little bit further, in an undisturbed watershed, this is a better model. And you see a large amount of evapotranspiration, the majority of water going into the soil and a small amount of surface runoff. We want that, but we specifically want the water to move through the soil and the subsoil, and enter what's called the groundwater. When water gets down to the point that it's deep soil or shallow soil water, that means that it is still going to enter these waterways and recharge them, but it's going to do so while it's moving through soil. And as you see there, soil has a lot of stuff going on in it. For the sake of water quality, what it means is that the stuff that's going on in there is cleaning it. The soil, just the physical structure of the soil itself, the insects, the invertebrates, the detritivores, they're all cleaning the water before it enters a water body. It goes into the groundwater, it gets cleaned, and then it enters the water body. Once it enters the water body, the stream or the lake that's there, it means that it's a better habitat for the fish that we're trying to protect. When that doesn't happen, the majority of the water that is entering the water body is doing so through the surface. It's not going into the groundwater and recharging, it's going over the surface and directly into the water body. When that happens, all of those pollutants that we talked about just a second ago are being carried with it into the water body. And there's a number of different pollutants and types of pollutants that we're going to talk about, but all of them have different negative effects. And even small amounts overall lead to negative impacts for fish habitat. So stormwater has a lot of problems, and I'm not trying to bum you out, but there's sort of four major ones that I want you to hold in your head when you're thinking about why does it matter that we manage stormwater. The first one is flooding. This occurs when there's just no place for water to go. Storm systems can get overwhelmed. They're essentially gray pipe systems. And if they get filled up, or if the water reaches a point that they can't flow out, you're left with serious flooding. This is something that we are starting to see in this area more and more, especially as climate change means that we have a much wetter wet season and a much drier dry season. We don't have the snowpack as much. We have a lot more heavy flooding events. Soil erosion. is exactly what it sounds like. It's when a lot of fast moving water starts carrying soil away. This is another reason that we want water to go into the soil and move laterally through the system. When it moves over ground, if the ground isn't held in place by grass or plants or some other system, it will just carry that soil with it. We have a saying at SCD: water always wins. If you don't believe us, ask the Grand Canyon. Water is really great at moving large amounts of soil, and large amounts of soil in our waterways is a real problem. In addition to pollution, it also means that, like bluffs come down. And the vast majority of this state, or at least this side of the mountains, seem to be built just right on bluffs that are being eroded. Pollution, as we just mentioned, here's a very dramatic picture of a lot of oil and things going into storm drains. That's probably something we're all used to seeing. The problem is that storm drain, there's probably not filtering between it and a water body. So whatever that water is carrying, it's going to end up in a fish's habitat. And then less groundwater. This is more of an issue east of the mountains, but this is still an issue for a lot of our farmers over here, who we very much want to support because they're growing food for us. The more runoff we have, the less that recharge effect I was talking about earlier. And the less groundwater and the less recharge, the less groundwater, meaning it's harder and harder for wells to work and irrigation based on wells to work. So that's a lot of bad news and a lot of bummer stuff. But we're going to talk about a couple of things that you can do to actually help solve this. So it's not all gloom and doom. The first one we're going to talk about is green stormwater infrastructure. This is commonly shortened to GSI. This is a way of mimicking a natural watershed in a very, very small area. You're not trying to completely reforest a town. You're trying to concentrate the same effect that a forest has in a very small area. You commonly probably know these as rain gardens. You also might know them as bioswales. There's a lot of them out here in the state. These can be private projects. They can go on in your yard, or they can be public projects that happen at a municipal or even a state level. We're going to talk about the stages of construction because I think what a lot of folks are here to talk about is not necessarily just how a rain garden works, but specifically why, like how to put a rain garden into practice. The first thing that you're going to do is you need to excavate, then you're going to backfill, then you're going to add wood chip mulch, and then at a later date you're going to do planting. And I'll talk about why that happens later. There's an old joke that we used to say when I was a private landscaper about government work, which was bring in the ditch digger and the ditch filler. This is actually more or less what we're doing. You want to do a lot. You're gonna dig down to a certain level, and you're gonna backfill it with soil. But you're gonna backfill it with different soil. And when we get to the backfilling section, I'll talk a little bit about that soil and how it works. And then you're gonna add a protective layer of wood chip mulch. There's a reason we use specifically wood chip mulch that I'll get into there. And then the planting is also very specific. So excavation. This is what we call the typical bean shape of a rain garden. There's not a really good reason to make it this sort of figure eight or infinity sign, but this is a very common shape just to sort of help make it look natural. You'll notice that this is a fairly deep hole. This is about I'd say maybe about 24, 26 inches down. And very critically, you'll notice that the soil changes color as it goes down. You want that. The reason we want that is because we want to get the garden low enough that when the water enters it, it's bypassing a lot of the topsoil that may cause it to pool laterally. And instead, it's trying to infiltrate down into the soil. So we're trying to expedite that infiltration process by shortcutting we're trying to fast track the infiltration process by getting the water down to the base soil as fast as possible. You'll also notice, if you can, that the texture of that soil seems very loose. You want the bottom to be a little bit scratched up. Same thing as getting it low. We want the water to be able to infiltrate deeply into that soil very, very quickly. You're also going to notice that there are two trenches at either side. Those are for the downspouts. In fact, you can see on the right one, they're up at the top. It's actually, you can see that where the downspout ends, right above it. One of the things that I often answer when people ask, you know, they come to me and they say, I have a spot that I think would be perfect for a rain garden. It's really wet and there's always standing water there. And I have to break their heart and say, I'm sorry, that's the worst place for a rain garden. You want to find a rain garden is best when you have you have an area that infiltrates water really well. It's just constantly dry. It doesn't matter how much it rains. It's always dry. And then you want to pipe all of your water there. So instead of water going out across your entire yard and maybe ending up in certain areas, you know, and being kind of damp, you just say, nope, all of the water goes right to this high infiltration spot. That's where, and this is the area that is going to handle it. So both of those trenches are for pipe that are going to carry water from the downspout into the rain garden where it can infiltrate very quickly. This is an example of the garden after it's been backfilled. This is obviously pre-pandemic, no one's wearing a mask, but this is what it looks like with the specialty soil having been added back in, and the garden is basically filled in. So at this point, you might think, David, I spent so much time digging this massive hole. Why would I fill it back in with soil? Well, the soil you're seeing there is a very different kind of soil. The soil is a specific engineered soil that the specifications were developed by the Department of Ecology, and it is a mix of compost and sand. And the reason you want compost is because you want to support plant life, and you want to hold a little bit of water in the compost. Compost is organic, so it'll hold water. But the reason you have so much sand, it's a lot of sand, it's like 60% sand, is because you want the water to move through it incredibly quickly. So this soil, which has a dozen different names, RGM standing for Rain Garden Mix, Bioretention Soil, 60/40, there's a lot of different names for this soil. This soil is in backfilled and it's kind of texturized a little bit. You'll notice there's kind of a dip there. We'll talk about that in just a second. And the reason you sort of put all that in there is so that when the water enters that area, the soil immediately picks all of it up. And then whatever isn't held for the plants by the compost infiltrates straight through to the ground. Now you notice the white splotch that's there. The pipe I was telling you about earlier, that's where it ends. The rock is around that pipe to protect the pipe from plants getting in, from weeds getting in, but also to act as a kind of energy dissipator, so that when water enters the downspout and flows through the pipe, it hits the rocks first and it slows down, and then it seeps into the garden instead of rushing into the garden and possibly disturbing the soil. So that's the backfilling step. After the backfilling step, we cover the whole area with wood mulch. You can see again those two outlets. The rock has been washed now. I think this is right after a rain event, actually. And you'll notice that there's a dark area around the middle of the pond. That isn't working. That means that the pond is wet and is currently holding water, and the water is in the process of infiltrating. So this is a garden without plants. Don't worry, it doesn't look like this all the time. But this is a garden without plants, and it is already doing its job. This wood chip that we use is a specific kind of wood chip called animal safe hogs fuel. It is also approved by Department of Ecology. I was about to make a joke about, I promise I'm not paid by Department of Ecology, but I absolutely am paid by the Department of Ecology. I am here doing this presentation because I'm paid by the Department of Ecology. So we tend to use their products, but their products are also just the best for this. I can get into a lot of detail as to why we use this specific mulch. If anybody's interested, I'm happy to answer questions about that. The bottom line is that it is the best version of wood chips to use for this process. And if you want to use something else, you have some things you need to consider. The reason that we like this in particular is that it forms mats when it gets wet. And as it gets wet, it sort of forms this layer, and that means that it is unlikely to be moved by water. So if water flows in, these wood chips are not going to move with heavy water. They're not going to float. They're going to stay still. And that's really important, especially for the first year or two. Otherwise, you end up having to put in a lot more wood chips. Some people like different wood chips, and they want to use, I want to use beauty bark or something. No, not beauty bark. Beauty bark, terrible. They want to use cedar chips. They want to use something like that, and they put it down, and then they're replacing it very quickly because they got a good rainstorm and all the chips floated away. So this is animal safe hogs fuel, and I'm happy to go into more detail about it if people are interested. And this is, I think, about a year on, and this is what a rain garden looks like when it's planted. They put a little bit of a dry path through the middle of it. I think that's fine. But once plants get in, they absolutely love this soil. We really have to be careful about what plants we choose to put into rain gardens, because some of them just get way too big. For instance, in the middle there, this is an older garden. The grasses that are there are part of the carex family. We don't use carex in garden anymore because we found out that they just take off. They get way too big, and then you have to spend a bunch of time ripping carex back out. So we don't suggest using those anymore. There's also a number of shrubs that we don't suggest because they just get massive. Trees we generally don't do because they get enormous. I'm not telling you that to tell you what you can't do. I'm telling you that because a few plants go a long ways, and they're really the highlight of rain gardens. And you want to be specific because they need to be able to handle drought conditions over the summer when it's very dry, and inundated conditions over the winter when it's very wet. But once they get established, they really are the powerhouses of this, and they can get massive and beautiful. So I've shown you sort of a real life example of how this is put together in relief. This is a side view, so you can get a little bit of an idea of, in terms of a diagram, what this is looking for. So you will go left to right. Starting here on the left, we have the downspout that goes to a pipe, a buried pipe that moves laterally and then deposits water into the rain garden. There's rock around the outlets so they can really be protected, and the energy can be dissipated, but then also plants can't grow into the pipe. You have the large excavated area backfilled with bioretention, and then on the right we have an overflow. In this case, an overflow is just a rock path that directs water to a spot that you're okay if water ends up. I have seen in how long have I been doing this? In the time that I've been building rain gardens, I think I've had a grand total of 2 overflow ever. It's really not common, but the overflow is basically a way to ensure that if something does happen, you get a massive rain event, that you can direct the water to where you want it to go. This usually means just sort of off of your property, or I'm sorry, if you're going by Seattle rules, it means into the right of way. By Snohomish rules, it means onto your property. You can't just send it to your neighbors to a certain place. Some people want to put it towards a plant that will be able to handle it. Some people have like a natural growth area. It's really case by case. This is a closer shot of the inlet that I was talking about. And again, the rockery is here to both protect the inlet, but also to make sure that the energy dissipates as it's coming out. There's also a little bit finer detail you can see on the wood chips and how they sort of form that mat so that they don't move together. you're gonna have a really hard time pulling one of these strands of these wood chips out of this big pile because they're all interconnected in this matrix. A couple things to note about offsets for anybody who's actually going to be doing this work. You want them to be 10 feet from buildings, 5 feet from utilities, and you want to have them 50 feet from a slope, and you want them to be outside the crowns of trees. I mention all of that because very commonly somebody asks us for a rain garden or asks us, if this place would be great for a rain garden, and they've already fallen in love with the idea of putting it in a specific spot. And we get there and it's not going to work. It's too close to the building, or it's on a massive slope, or it's directly underneath like a crabapple tree, or, and this happens too, we do that, we call 811. It turns out there's a gas line running through the middle of it. So when you're considering, where these things should go and siting your own rain garden, you want to have it away from your house. You want to have it fairly level. You want to keep it fairly out of the right of way because you need to get right of way permits if you do that. You want to keep it away from trees. It needs to be out big and exposed in the sun. You also want the spot to be very dry. And you want to make sure that you have access to at least one downspout that will be able to run from your house directly out to where the rain garden is going to go.
David?
Yes.
Sorry, quick question before we get to the question answer break. One of our attendees is asking if you're going to talk more about bioswales, if you could talk a little bit about those before we get to rainwater catchment.
Yes, I'm going to talk about a bioswale in the context of this picture you see here on your right, because they are almost functionally identical to rain gardens with a couple specific changes. A bioswale does not necessarily have an inlet or an outlet. What it does have is a slope. A bioswale is the same thing as a rain garden. You're still excavating, putting in bioretention, putting on wood chips, and putting plants in. But a bioswale is not meant necessarily to hold all of the water in place. A bioswale is meant to infiltrate water while it moves it somewhere else. So the most common version of a bioswale that you'll see is a drainage ditch, which I think we're all familiar with. Drainage ditch comes in and sloshes sideways and sends water on down its way. Retrofitted. So you take a drainage ditch, you excavate a few inches down, you put down bioretention, you put down wood chips, you do some planting, and now instead of that water moving very fast through the bioswale and discharging somewhere else, the water enters the bioswale, infiltrates as the water is moved off to its next place. Bioswales are meant to handle very large volumes of water. And the reason that they're sloped is because it's assumed that all of the water they are handling is not necessarily going to infiltrate in one spot, but most of it. Most of the water will be held by the soil and then infiltrate or taken up by the plants. But the 20–30% of the water that isn't is going to be continually moved along until it reaches wherever the bioswale wants to go. The end of a bioswale might be a stream or a water body. The end of a bioswale might be a grate that goes off to the municipal stormwater system. The end of a bioswale might be a large, massive bioinfiltration rain garden or something. But that's the key difference of a bioswale, is that it's not a rain garden is basically like a pit that is going to hold the water in one place. The bioswale is a tunnel that is going to move the water from one place to another. Is that an adequate answer?
I think I'm not seeing anything yet about that. We could, oh, yep, they say very good. So thank you very much, David.
Great. I always talk about bioswales and abstracts, and I don't have a lot of really pretty things because usually bioswales aren't done by individuals. And the reason that bioswales usually aren't done by individuals is because they're meant to move a ton of water, and they usually occur either in the agricultural setting or in a municipal setting. And if it's going through a municipal setting, you need to go through a much more comprehensive review and permitting process because you're probably doing them in the right of way. If you're doing them in an agricultural setting, you need to have a farm planner and an engineer actually design an agricultural stormwater B&P for you. It's a rain garden is something that you can go out and dig yourself. I've dug, probably a dozen with just a shovel. I've had a bunch of people put in their own rain gardens. Bioswales are different. You should know how they work, especially if you have one in your neighborhood. But they're a much bigger undertaking in terms of engineering and design. But I also want everyone to sort of know what they are, because if you have one in your neighborhood, they're remarkable. This picture on the left is a bioswale. I put these pictures in here because I want folks to see what rain gardens look like and bioswales look like when they're working. We often take really pretty pictures of these in the summer when they're blooming and beautiful, and then people don't realize that rain gardens are supposed to have standing water in them. And they go, oh no, this is terrible. The rain garden isn't working. So I started consciously putting these in and going, no, it's okay. Standing water is okay. Standing water is okay. The rule of thumb for that is that standing water is okay for up to 48 hours. But in 48 hours, your rain garden or bioswale should drain back down to dry. So if you put in a rain garden and you're noticing, oh, it's been a couple days and the water is not clearing, you might have a problem. But if it's been 24 hours and it looks like the water's starting to go down, you're probably fine. Rain gardens, GSI in general, is also one of the very few things in the world that get better with age. As they get older, the plants grow up and they will take more water. The soils open up and develop pathways and drain more efficiently. So you will notice if you put one of these in that for the first year, it doesn't work as well as it's going to 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the line. Again, if it's still been more than 48 hours, you might have a problem. But if it's been 24 and it drains after that, it's going to be okay. And just look forward to another 2 years down the line when it drains in under 12 hours. And the last thing before we take a break for questions, is I'd like folks to I like showing this picture, because if someone is going to either ask us for a design, ask a conservation district for a design, go out to a landscaper to get a design or try to design this themselves, I like them to kind of know what they're looking at, and not be overwhelmed the first time that they see a drawing like this. This looks like a fairly complicated thing, and if you're not used to seeing them, I think it might even be a little bit overwhelming. But all this is doing is indicating the little polka dots with the little tufts on them. That is the rain garden area. The circles, the little tiny dark black circles, those are inlets and outlets, and the rest of the area is native planting. The 2 circular cutouts are trees, which again normally we wouldn't do that close to a tree. And there's also some stuff on here on doing curb cuts and things like that. But this is about as complicated as a drawing ever should be. And if you want to do a drawing for yourself, you absolutely can. All you really need to do is know how, where it's going to go, how large it's supposed to be, and I'm happy to talk people through finding the correct size, and give you resources for that. But you mainly just need to know how large it's supposed to be, what shape you would like it for it to be, how the water is going to get in, and what happens if the water has to get out. And once you have that, you can get to the fun part of digging in the dirt and picking out plants. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions. It looks like we have a dozen or so, before we move on to rain catchment, the second half of this.
Do you want me to read them off for you, David, so you don't have to try to pick through?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that sounds nice.
Okay. The first one is mulch better at absorbing water than a standard lawn? This came in when you were talking about using the animal-friendly hog fuel.
Yes. Yes, depending on the mulch. There's some mulch that there's not. and there's some mulch that will cause you more problems or cause more problems than it will solve. But in general, turf lawn is bad. And I do another series on alternatives for lawns, and I'm happy to talk more about it. I don't actually hate turf lawns, but they're not good at taking up water. People think like, oh, well, it's just soil and grass, and the way that it grows is just not helpful for anybody. So yes, mulch is definitely better. Mulch on its own is not necessarily going to do you too many favors, though. Mulch with plants is your best bet if you're not going to do either just like straight prairie or straight native plants or some kind of GSI. And it also matters a great deal what kind of mulch you're getting. But native wood chip mulch is sort of the go-to standard. And if anybody has questions about where to get native wood chip mulch, I'm happy to help you with that as well.
Thank you. How often does the wood mulch need to be top dressed?
Oh, once every 3 years is pretty standard. But frankly, after maybe 6 or 7, it'll be less than that. Wood chip mulch is largely there to help keep water in, protect the plants and roots, protect the garden as the plants grow up. Once the plants reach maturity, you'll do it both less often and you'll need to use less mulch.
Right. Let's see. Do you have any recommendations on determining where a home's pre-existing drain tiles go or discharge to?
No, that sounds like yeah. I would take that one to the county or to your municipality. That is something that like, yeah, plat maps are going to be necessary for. Yeah, short of getting those resources, I don't have any good direction for you. Sorry.
Okay, next one. Is there funding to assist converting a swale to a bioswale through ag land? Do you need more details on that? I can ask them to unmute.
I was actually going to say, I think that's probably a question for Allison because she knows the funding in this area far better than I do or will.
Yeah, I would say definitely follow up with us, either depending on your district. If it is Woodby Island, feel free to follow up with me directly. But depending on your land and your concerns, there could be, and we'd love to chat more with you about those cost share assistance programs.
Okay, great. Next question. If you're not making a bioswale, oh, sorry, I misread that. There was a typo, I think. We live on a hill and water runs along the hill quickly in storms. Are there any suggestions on what plants other than grass to plant along the road so that they can hold and slow down the water?
Yes, but I'm going to need to know a little bit more about your setup. Can we come back to this one at the end? Because I'd like to ask you for a few more details, but I want to keep moving forward with some other questions. The short answer is yes. And if I can come up with one off the top of my head, Kinnickinnick would be a good one. But I think to give you a better answer, I need a few more details.
Okay, I'm going to highlight that one and we'll come back to that at the end. Next question, can you explain the difference? Why is dog waste different than wild animal waste? I may be able to pipe in on that too.
It's different for a couple reasons. One is it's different in its composition, with the exception of coyotes. Dogs have a very different diet, and so there's a reason that you don't compost with dog feces. There's a lot of bacteria, a lot of grease and protein in it. The more significant reason though is concentration. Animal waste, if a bear hypothetically craps in the woods, the water, it's unlikely that the water that hits the bear's leavings is going to make it over land to a water body. It is extremely likely that dog waste could be flushed in part or in total into a stormwater drain, which could then empty directly into a waterway. So I think if I understand your question, you're asking like why is it different, that a dog, takes a crap somewhere like out, in somebody's lawn or at a dog park or something like that versus like a coyote taking a crap somewhere in the woods. And it's not really a matter of the actual feces, it's a matter of the conveyance method. And it's not just dogs in urban areas. Cats, crows, coyotes, pigeons. Part of my undergrad study was actually on crow waste in the municipal stormwater system for the exact same reason. And if that is also a problem. It's not just dogs. There's nothing necessarily special about dogs. It's the way that the water is conveyed and how it carries the concentrations of what's called fecal coliform bacteria. If that does not answer your question, or if I misunderstood your question, please let me know. But if I understand what you're asking correctly, that is the reason. It's about concentration.
All right, I'm not seeing any follow-up or further questions. So oh, wait a minute. Oh, she says thank you. So apparently that great answer. Thank you.
If anybody wants to talk about my undergraduate research, I am available for the next 4 hours to talk about it. Anyway, okay. Well, with that, we will move on. And just FYI, we will have time for more questions at the end. So if you think of something, please don't think that you've missed your chance. And I will continue to be available through. I will continue to be available if you want to send me emails or give me a call and ask follow-up questions as well. So now we're going to move on to rainwater storage. Rainwater storage is a kind of not really the opposite, but it's a very different way of handling stormwater. GSI is about getting rid of stormwater and putting it back into the natural system. Rainwater storage is about hanging on to stormwater, treating it ourselves, and using it for different things. The most common version of this is rain barrels. I think a lot of people have seen rain barrels. We're going to see some in this presentation, but they are kind of the dollar store version of stormwater catchment. Totes are a little bit different. You may have seen IBC totes. They're larger, they stack. Some people find them really cool looking. Some people think they look terrible, but they're kind of the next step up. And then there's cisterns. This is an extremely expensive cistern. These sort of systems are now very expensive because they're very trendy. They also look incredible. But a cistern is basically any system about 500 gallons and up. They can be above ground, below ground. There's just kind of no end to them. They can be fairly inexpensive to bespoke, absolute, monuments to money in certain cases. So using rainwater as you collect it, how you want to use it really comes down to a few different key elements. Please do not worry about this math over here. Do not rush to write any of this down. It is not going to be helpful for you to know all of this stuff just yet. If it is, you are already a fluid dynamics engineer, and why would you need to for me to tell you how to do this stuff? So don't worry about that. It's just for demonstration purposes. The three main elements of using rainwater is how much you're going to use, when you are going to use it, and how much head pressure you are going to be able to use, how much head pressure you're going to be able to generate to use it. The amount has to do with this, has to do with the size of your system, but also the size of your capture area. A lot of people want to get a really big system, and they go, "This is great. I'm gonna, get this enormous system," and they don't have the capture area. they don't have enough capture area to even fill the thing up halfway. The amount of capture area is basically your roof. And I'm going to dispel a very common myth about rainwater collection. Right now, as I do very often, you are absolutely allowed to collect rainwater. It is not illegal to collect rainwater. However, the only thing that you can collect rainwater from is a building that is not specifically set up to collect rainwater. As an example, if I have a farm, I can collect rainwater from my house. I can collect rainwater from my work shed. I can collect rainwater from my barn. All of those do different things. I cannot go out into my field and set up a tent and collect rainwater from the tent, because I will have set the tent up to collect rainwater. So as long as your house, garage, barn, shed, gazebo, whatever is there to do something besides collect rainwater, you can take rainwater off it. The reasons for this are numerous, and I'm happy to explain them if people actually care, but that is the dispelling of the myth in general. The other part of the amount is not just what your capture area is or how large your system is. It's also how much are you actually going to use. I see, again, a lot of people getting really, really big systems to capture from really big areas, and they're not going to use even a tenth of it. What happens when you get a system and let it fill up and don't use the water is it overflows. And if it overflows, it usually goes back into the municipal system, or it goes over land and we're right back where we started from. So also consider how much of this water you're actually going to use. You can come up with a watering schedule, you can make estimates, and you can really put together, you can come up with a really solid equation of this is how much water I'm going to use, this is how much I can collect. Maybe you want to go the other direction and say, I don't know, how much can I collect? I'll figure out how to use it all. Godspeed. Just know that if you don't, you're going to have overflow issues. In terms of season, around here, it's very wet in the winter. It's not very wet in the summer. So ideally, you have your system sized to where you are going to capture water all winter long and then start using it, around May and June when it starts getting drier. And then you use it all the way down and you get to like October and you're like, cool, I've used up all 500 gallons, let's say. And then you go, great, I'm going to close this thing back up and I'm going to wait until next year and just start capturing water again. The last thing, which this diagram examines, is called head pressure. Head pressure is the amount of pressure generated by the weight of the water in the storage device. Anybody who wants to actually me in the chat and say, well, David, it's not actually just I know you are correct. I admit that you are correct. It's a lot more complicated than that, but for our purposes tonight, we're going to say head pressure is just the weight of the water in the storage device. The reason that is important is because depending on your head pressure, you can do or not do certain things. You will have more head pressure the higher the top of your water is in the storage container, and you will have more head pressure the higher up your storage area is from wherever your use is. So we'll get into this in a bit, but if your tank is 10 feet, or if your tank is 1 foot above the garden beds that you want to water with the rainwater from this tank, you're going to get fairly weak head pressure. If your tank is 25 feet at the top of a hill from your garden beds, you're going to get significantly more head pressure. So something to consider when you're kind of planning where you want to put stuff and how much water you want to use and how you want to use it. Now, if you need to maintain pressure, there are ways around it. You can get a pump, you can get a solar pump. They're inexpensive and very easy to maintain. But A lot of folks, they don't want to do that. They want to work entirely off head pressure. You just have to remember higher is better, more weight is better. So here are some of the blue barrels that we were talking about. These are rain barrels. This is not how I would install this system, but it's a pretty good system. These barrels are set up in what is called battery, as opposed to in sequence, meaning that they will all fill up together at the same rate. I can explain why that is and how that works if anybody is interested, but this is a very good way to improve that head pressure we were talking about. Your head pressure is going to be consistent across all of the barrels, as opposed to filling one up, filling the next up, filling the third up. You'll see the downspout diverter on the left that's coming down into the barrels. That's a very similar principle to diverting your downspout into a rain garden. It's just going into the barrels instead. Right next to that, you see the overflow. You'll notice that at the very top of that barrel is where, if it hits that point, then the water flows back out of that pipe. You want your overflow as high up as possible because you want to capture as much water as possible. And then you can see they're connected down underneath the wood structure. And then you have a spigot there, which has hose threading, so you can just attach a garden hose to and go from there. It's a fairly common kind of setup for rain barrels. We do ours a little bit different, but in general, this is more or less how it works. So when should you use your rainwater? When do you want to be using it? You want to use it in the summer when it's not raining. You want to use it on dry days. You're kind of in an on-off situation. If it's raining, your rain barrel system is tied up and you are saving water. If it's not raining, then you are draining water down. There's not really a reason to be using your rainwater. I guess if you had a system that wasn't reached by the rain, but in general, you want to use it on drier, hotter days. And then you want to do it whenever you want to save city water, whenever you don't want to pay for municipal or county water. For your garden or your greenhouse or any of the other permitted uses. So we're going to talk about stormwater filtration. This one, I'm going to tell Allison to interrupt me because this is very much a Snohomish thing. So I'm going to talk about what I know, which is the Snohomish rules around around stormwater use. Allison, if I'm wrong about any of this, for Woodby Island, please jump in and tell me so I'm not giving these lovely folks wrong information. Your rain barrel already has a good amount of filtration built into it. If it's coming from us or from most other places or using resources that we have, it has a great filter, GRATE filter, right underneath the. It's great. It does its best. But it has a great filter underneath where the downspout comes in. That keeps large debris like leaves and things out. And then it has a gap. All rain barrels should have a gap between the bottom of the barrel and the faucet, and that is called the sump. The sump, some folks may know the term sump pump. This is sort of where that comes from. The sump is an area for any contaminants, sediment, things like that to settle at the bottom of a containment device. You want that to happen because if your water is coming in, and it fills up, the heavier particles are going to settle at the bottom, and then the water that comes out of the tap is going to be cleaner. That is good enough for most uses. That is all the filtration you need. You just need to keep the heavy debris out, and you need to let the sump do its work. If you want to do something more specific, you can do a couple different stages of filtration. There's kind of 3 general stages of filtration depending on what you're using it for. In this case, we're going to talk about micro irrigation because I know there's some folks who are interested in that. And filtration. For micro irrigation, well, first, actually, let me explain a little bit about what micro irrigation or low volume irrigation is. This is a system of irrigation that uses the least possible water. The opposite of this would be like the big overhead sprinklers that toss water all over the place and evaporate. Micro irrigation delivers a relatively small amount of water directly to the soil and to the roots of the plant, so that they're getting just the water that they need. Drip irrigation is the most expensive of this, and it's also the most efficient. Drip tape is a similar version of this, but it's more common in agricultural settings. And soaker hoses are the least intense, least maintenance, cheapest version of this. They're also probably, of the three, the least efficient. It's still worlds more efficient than overhead sprinkling. And there's also the easiest to maintain. In order to use micro irrigation of any kind from rainwater, you want to at least have a sediment filter. Sediment filter is shown in the image to the left, in the image to the right. And it's basically just a trap that stops sediment before it enters the filtration, before it enters the irrigation system. If you don't use a sediment filter, there's a very good chance that you are going to clog your emitters with sediment and have to clean them out, which may or may not be possible depending on what kind of irrigation you're using. So I strongly recommend using a sediment filter. If you are going to use them to water plants, I strongly recommend also putting in, if you're going to use them to water plants that do not take up from the soil, they don't take water up from the soil, they're actually being watered overhead. Or they're things like potatoes, carrots, tubers. I also recommend you getting a charcoal filter. In the event that you have heavy metals coming off of your roof or just lodged in the sediment, the charcoal filter will catch them. I also recommend a charcoal filter if you are going to use this to water any livestock, because it will filter out a number of fatal contaminants for livestock as well. The last thing that I'll say about filtration is that the soil is a really good filter. If you are eating something, if you're growing food that comes off of a vine, the soil is probably going to be a perfectly fine filter for you. It will especially be a fine filter for things like sediment or fecal coliform. If you are concerned about that, still get a charcoal filter. Sometimes heavy metals make it through. If any of that is a concern to you, go ahead and just get a charcoal filter. They're not particularly expensive, and if it might just be worth a peace of mind. So why would you filter? And I see we're running out of time, so I'm going to move really quickly. Why should you filter? Stormwater contains sediment. Sediment is all sorts of soil, as well as metal and biological particles like the fecal coliform we're talking about. The soil will filter all of it, or will filter some of it, but not all of it. And as I said, it will clog your micro irrigation. I say all of this stuff. The last thing that I'll say is I don't want people to panic. I'm not trying to scare anybody about filtration. The soil does a very good job. If you're not eating any of the stuff that you're using, or if you aren't using it on animals, you really don't need to worry as much. It's not something to be worried about, and there's lots of very good research out there. I will get back to what I was saying earlier at the beginning of this. Thanks very much to the Department of Ecology. They make this all of this possible, and we are very grateful to them. And I'm happy to take any questions. And I know we are close on time, so if we want to just ask people to email us, I am also happy to do that, but I can stick around and talk for a little bit longer if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I'm happy to stay around too if folks want to either drop more questions in the chat or go ahead and unmute, but I am going to send out a really quick poll if folks could just share some information with us about what you learned, and feel free to add any questions in the chat also. Okay, great. So I did see that there was one question that was missed earlier, which was around where to source native wood chips.
Yes, so there's a couple different places. You can make friends with local arborist companies. There's also a website called Chip Drop that will bring it basically connects arborists that have down trees in your area with places to dump them. Chip Drop is a great resource, but you do need to be very careful and specific about what you ask for. And you need to make sure that you're in contact with the people who are going to drop the wood chips, so you know what you're getting. It is not uncommon to get invasive species or even toxic species that have been taken out in the area, and then you're in a bad situation. So if you want to know more about Chip Drop or kind of how to use it best, feel free to contact me at the email there below, and I am more than happy to kind of give you a Chip Drop 101.
It looks like there's another question in the chat about gray water. It's not super specific, but just around who to talk to. Do they need to talk to a plumber if they're interested in doing gray water? I know that's very county specific too.
It's very county specific. And Snohomish County has very different rules around it than would be Island. So I'm gonna suggest you talk to the county about that. Either talk to the county government or potentially the county health district. A lot of times the health district is the one that actually writes the policy on gray water.
And for Island County, the health district is part of Island County government. So it's Island County Public Health. Snohomish County has Snohomish Health District, which is not associated with Snohomish County. They're their own thing. The person who asked the question about where to source native wood chip mulch had to leave early. So if we could send a follow-up email and answer about that in a follow-up email.
Sure.
There's another question here was, oh, we've got a couple different things here. One is, what is the best source of, okay. Was there information for the best source for large tanks? And then also somebody has a question about natural springs. So let's start with the tanks and then we'll get to the next one.
Can you repeat the question about tanks?
How to find, what is the best source for large tanks, cistern tanks?
Oh, yes. And if this is the same person who asked us in their pre-registration, please email myself and Allison. I don't have a great answer for you, and the reason is a very governmenty kind of reason. But I would be more than happy to put you in contact with a handful of places to kind of start your research. So I apologize, I can't give you a solid answer over this, but I promise we will get you some resources.
Okay, and the question about springs is, I know your focus is stormwater, but what about natural springs? We have a natural spring that flows across our fence line into the neighbor's field and ultimately into a marsh. We are fighting lots of blackberry brambles and wild roses, but would like to have more native protectors. Yeah.
I'm guessing they mean like protectors of the spring area.
That makes sense.
That's noble, and I applaud you. You're going to have a little bit of an uphill battle with the blackberries, and unfortunately, until you get them out, they're going to outcompete just about anything else you put in there. The thing that I can tell you that would be the most helpful is look for evergreen wetland plants. Labrador tea and bog laurel would be two good ones to start with. Rhododendron in general would actually be pretty good to put in that area. The larger you can get, the better, within reason. If you could start with 1 or 5 gallon pots, that would be great. That's a size of pot from a nursery. And if you can get them set up early, you might be able to shade out the blackberry and kind of help stunt it while you're continuing to remove it. The trick with springs is that you need to have something that is going to be is going to take up a lot of water, be okay being inundated. But then when the spring, I'm guessing, dries up in the summer, you need something that will still be able to kind of handle its own. So yeah, salix willows would also be good to put there. You don't have to worry about them getting too large. Yeah, I think willows, bog laurel, and Labrador tea, I think would probably be my three best recommendations, and start with willows. You can also get willows really, really inexpensively, and you can plant them with stakes, and you can plant just a bunch of them.